All right, everyone. So today I'm going to share with you guys some very important information on what you're going to need to know to make the best decisions on what artifacts to sell versus what artifacts to keep. And this is actually going to become more important the longer you end up playing Raid Shadow Legends, because the longer you play, the more artifacts you're going to get, and the closer your artifact storage is going to get to filling up. And that means you're going to have to make more difficult decisions on what artifacts to sell versus what artifacts to keep. So that's kind of going to be the golden rule among everything that I end up saying in this video, is the more artifact space that you have, the less artifacts you need to sell, which means you can be less strict with what kind of sets off the alarm bells for, okay, this artifact didn't really roll what I'm looking for. Now I can either stop investing in it or just flat out sell it to free up artifact space. So with that being said, also very importantly is we have to go over these different categories of artifacts, and there's two of them that you need to be aware of, and that is going to be your weapons, your helmets, and your shields, and your gloves, chests, and boots. Now, those of you guys who have watched some of my other artifact videos on the channel, you're probably pretty familiar with this, but it's going to be very important to know these two categories because they're going to make a huge difference on the decision of whether to sell artifacts versus whether to keep them. It's not just going to be important to know for the actual stats on gearing out your champions, it's also important to know for different priorities on selling versus keeping artifacts. So an easy way to know this as well is that if you go to your actual equipment screen, you have category 1, which is going to be your top row right here, your weapon, helmet, and shields. And then you have category 2, which is going to be your middle row here, your glove, chests, and your boots. Now for this video, we're going to leave out the third category, which is going to be jewelry, because that's a whole different story on its own. So today we're just going to be talking about the top row, category 1, and the middle row, category 2. And there's a lot to go over just with that set right there. Now, really importantly, for the first category, which is going to be your weapon, your helmet, and your shield, you're actually going to be more strict with selling this stuff, which means it's going to be easier for you to kind of set off those alarm bells when you roll a bad stat or something. Okay, because it's a weapon, a helmet, or a shield, I'm going to be a lot easier, and it's going to be a lot more likely that I'm going to sell this. Now, that's the opposite for that second category, gloves, chests, and boots. For gloves, chests, and boots, you're going to be less strict, which means you should be a lot more open to actually keeping it versus rather than selling it. And the reason for this is quite simple. Now, when you take a look at the actual artifacts, you'll see that weapons, helmets, and shields always have the same main stats. So weapons will always have flat attack, helmets will always have flat HP, and shields will always have flat defense. And because they always have the same main stats, the only thing that you need to look at when it comes to category 1 artifacts is the actual substats. You never need to worry about looking at the main stats because they're always going to be the same anyway. Now, that is absolutely not the case for gloves, chests, and boots. Not only are they going to roll substats just like the category 1 artifacts do, but they also roll different main stats. And you can actually take a look at this by going to the campaign, just for an example here. So you got your weapon, again, only flat attack. Those are the only possibilities for weapons. Helmets, only possibility HP. Shields, flat defense. But now, if you take a look at gloves, these are all the different main stats that you can end up getting on gloves. So lots of different stuff, lots of different possibilities, and of course, there are going to be some really good ones, and there are going to be some really bad ones. But right off the bat, the bad ones are going to be your flat stats, like flat HP, flat attack, and flat defense. And what this means is that whenever you end up getting gloves, chests, or boots that have those flat stats, unless it has absolute god tier stats, and this is a very rare exception that even I almost never really follow, unless it rolls absolutely godly like crit rate, crit damage, and speed, and it's a really good epic, maybe it's 6-star, you're pretty much just always going to end up selling gloves, chests, and boots that have a flat stat main stat roll, regardless of what the substats are. It doesn't matter, even if it has speed, crit rate, crit damage, it doesn't really make a difference. If it has a flat main stat, you're not going to want to take the resources to invest in it, and you're just going to get rid of it right away. Now, because of that, what that means is that you're overall going to end up with a lot more weapons, helmets, and shields. Because you're going to be selling a lot of gloves, chests, and boots right off the bat, you're going to roughly get the same number of artifacts across the board. You're going to end up with more weapons, helmets, and shields, so that means you can be more strict with them, and if they roll any kind of combination of bad stats, you could be willing to sell them right away. Now, when it comes to the gloves, the chests, and the boots, you're going to want to be less strict with these, and if they roll a couple of medium or bad stats, you might still want to hold off on them because you're going to be selling all the bad ones with really bad main stats right off the bat anyway. So I really hope that this makes sense to those of you guys, especially that are newer. I know this might be a bit complicated if you guys are extremely new to Raid Shadow Legends, but I'm trying to explain this the best way that I can. And this is very important to understand this concept when it comes to learning what artifacts to sell versus to keep, because you don't want to make the mistake that I ended up making and a lot of other people make still to this day, and that is to sell too many gloves, chests, and boots and then not sell enough weapons, helmets, or shields. Or what ends up happening after playing for a couple of months is you take a look at your artifacts and 75% or so of your artifacts are just weapons, helmets, and shields, and you are always going to be way too short on decent gloves, chests, and boots. So, alright. Now, when it comes to the actual substat priority, this is also very important. And this doesn't matter whether it's for those Category 1 artifacts or whether it's for those Category 2 artifacts. You're going to want to follow this for all artifacts nonetheless. And that is the best substats are going to be speed, crit rate, and crit damage. Those are the things that I always look for right off the bat. And the longer you play, the more of these best substats you're just going to pretty much want to always have on a piece of gear before you even consider it. But those of you guys who are still, newer or intermediate players, it's totally fine if you only have maybe 1 or 2 of these on a piece of gear, and then the rest of it is medium stats, for example. Now, the medium stats are definitely not bad. The reason why I put them in the medium list is just because they are a bit lower in terms of priority in comparison to speed, crit rate, and crit damage. Speed, crit rate, and crit damage are just so good that they're always going to be above those percentage stats. I also threw accuracy in there as well, especially for buffers and debuffers. That's not going to be a bad one. But then, of course, you have your bad stats, which are going to be your flat stats like flat defense, HP, attack, and I also threw resistance in there as well. So kind of important to get at least a rough understanding of this, because now what you can do is you can apply this to kind of know, well, if a piece of gear has too many bad stats on it, it's time to stop investing in it, it's time to sell it. If it has a combination of bad stats and medium stats, but it hasn't been rolling any of the best stats, which is speed, crit damage, okay, then now it's going to be time in order to sell it. So very important that you kind of learn this. But the question is, how many bad stats or how many medium stats before I end up selling a piece of gear? Well, this is actually going to depend on whether it is a weapon, helmet, or shield versus whether it is a glove, chest, or boots. Because again, like I said, you're going to be more strict with the weapon, the helmets, and the shields, and you're going to be less strict with the gloves, the chests, and the boots. So let's see here. Main stat priority. Let me actually skip ahead to this one right here. And that is going to be what I personally like to do when it comes to how many stats that I get on pieces of gear and then making the decision on whether to sell it versus whether to keep it. Now, remember that golden rule. This is just going to be for me personally, but if you guys have a lot of artifact space, you're probably going to be even less strict, because the more artifact space that you have, the less artifacts that you need to sell. So as you get closer and closer to filling up your artifact space, you can become more and more strict now on what artifacts you're going to sell or not. But when it comes to what I actually sell is for weapons, helmets, or shields, because they're going to be the most strict with these, I usually end up selling them even if they end up getting one bad stat. So going back to that priority list right here of substats, if I end up seeing a weapon, helmet, or shield that rolls flat defense, flat HP, flat attack, resistance, I just sell it right away, because I know that because weapons, helmets, and shields don't actually have main stats, it's going to be easy for me to get another one to try to upgrade, and I don't really have to worry about it so much. So one bad stat, that's what I do. Now, if you still have a lot of artifact space, maybe it's 2 bad stats, because you don't have the need to sell as many artifacts. Now, when it comes to the Category 2 artifacts, for percentage stat gloves, percentage stat chests, and percentage stats boots, those are going to be things like, HP gloves, not these ones, like HP gloves or percentage defense chest, or, percentage HP boots, things like this. This is kind of like the middle of the road for your gloves, chests, and your boots. And these ones, I'm not quite as strict as the category 1 artifacts. So for these ones, if it rolls like 2 bad stats or 3 to 4 medium stats as well, you know, if I end up rolling, even if it's not bad stats in particular, if I get too many rolls without landing on one of those really good rolls, crit rate, crit damage, or speed, at that point, I'll also decide to myself, okay, it's probably not going to be worth the resources because crit rate, crit damage, and speed are just so powerful in comparison to every other stat. Even if it rolls the percentage stats, if it doesn't roll one of the really good ones, that's still another decision that I have to make to myself of whether I'm going to keep it or not. But as you can see, there's a big difference. I'll stop working on it usually at 2 bad stats versus a combination of 3 to 4 medium stats. Now, when it comes to gloves, chests, and boots, you have certain ones that are going to be better than the percentage ones. So like for boots, you have percentage HP, but we all know for boots, you're definitely going to want to get speed. That's going to be the best main stat to get. So the priority list for boots is going to be speed for the main stat. You're always going to want that as the best one. Then I kind of value the percentage ones in the middle of the road, like percentage HP, percentage defense, percentage attack. And then, of course, the ones that you pretty much just always sell right away are going to end up being things like flat attack, flat defense, and stuff like that. So for this category here, if it's crit rate gloves, crit damage gloves, or speed boots, which I always consider to be the most valuable, these ones I'm going to be the least strict with, which means that even if it rolls a good amount of bad stats, I'm still going to keep these because it's really difficult in order to get replacements. It's really difficult to get, for example, 5 or 6 star speed boots that have any kind of decent combination of substats. So even if it rolls 2 bad substats, I'll still probably end up keeping it and maybe work on it some more before making the decision of whether to sell it or not. Or if it rolls, 5 to 6 medium stats, again, you can always end up adjusting this yourself based off of the number of artifact slots that you have. The most important thing to take away from this is not the actual number of bad rolls on whether to sell it or not. The most important thing to take away from whether to sell artifacts or whether to keep artifacts is, depending on the main stats, what level of strictness are you going to be with what it rolls. So the most strict is going to be your weapons, your helmets, and your shield. The medium level of strictness is going to be percentage, HP, attack, defense, gloves, chests, and boots. And the least strict, the things that you're going to want to keep the most of, are going to be your crit rate gloves, your crit damage gloves, and your speed boots. So going back here, let's see if there's anything. So these are going to end up being that main stat priority right here. So pretty much exactly what I said right now. So for gloves, crit damage, crit rate, always going to be better than percentage defense, percentage HP, and percentage attack, which of course is always going to be better than those flat stats, which you pretty much always get rid of anyway. For chests, because chests don't have any kind of super insane stat, percentage defense, percentage HP, percentage attack are all going to be roughly the same. Those are going to be way better than flat stats, and pretty much just get rid of the flat stats right away. And then boots, of course, speed is king, so always value those the most, keep those ones the most, and then percentage defense, HP, and attack. Of course, the flat stats you're pretty much just always going to end up getting rid of. So this is pretty much what I mentioned, except very importantly, another way to think about it is always be more strict with gloves, chests, and boots than weapons, helmet, shield, because you sell about half of them right away. Whenever you get gloves, chests, or boots that have a flat stat on it, you're just going to sell it. You never end up doing that with your weapons, your helmets, and your shields, which means you're going to have about twice as many of them to work on. So, if it rolls anything bad, you can get rid of it and not feel as bad because you're just going to get more of them a lot easier to end up replacing it. And of course, once again, the very important golden rule, the most important thing, or one of the most important things to take away from this video is the more space you have, the less strict you can be. There used to be a reason to want to keep a lot more free space, but now that we don't have those lag issues anymore, it's really not a big deal. It's totally fine to still be at 600 to 650 out of 700 artifacts. You shouldn't really have any kind of lag issues. When they did a bunch of those quality of life changes, they made the artifact screen way less laggy. The only thing that I could think of is if you are an overnight farmer, and even then it's totally fine to have a lot of artifacts, because as long as you have space in your mailbox, they're going to end up getting sent here, even if your artifact storage ends up getting full. So I threw a lot of info at you guys in this video. I'm really hoping this one wasn't a bit overwhelming. I have a feeling like it might have been, especially to those of you guys who are really new, but I did the best that I could to explain this to you, and hopefully after learning these principles and understanding them a little bit better, it'll get a lot easier for you guys to get an understanding of what artifacts to sell in Raid Shadow Legends versus what artifacts to keep. So this is obviously a very big topic in the game, so there will definitely be plenty more artifact related videos in the future. You're going to spend a lot of time working on artifacts in Raid Shadow Legends, not just upgrading them, but just kind of managing artifacts in general. So definitely keep an eye out for those videos in the future. And if you guys did enjoy this video and you want more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you to those of you guys who do. Really do appreciate it. Feel free to toss a quick like as well. It means a whole bunch. And of course, if you're interested in more videos, they should be popping up on the screen right about now. Almost 100 Raid Shadow Legends videos on the channel. So feel free to take a look at that playlist on the channel as well. Have a great day, everyone. Take care. And until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.